had this discussion behind the stage. I think our topic is so broad, right? Payment and innovation. So before we dive in, because we know we can tackle it from so many different directions, John, maybe you can provide your perspective on how does really blockchain innovation apply to the payment space, and what is payments to begin with before you even talk about blockchain and how it relates to that?
I just said out the back that blockchain's completely fucking useless when it comes to payments. Because it is. The idea that blockchain's going to replace Visa and MasterCard is complete nonsense. Because that infrastructure is phenomenal for the use case of us wanting to go buy coffee. Blockchain isn't replacing that anytime soon. So we also have to define what blockchain is, because if we're talking about a blockchain versus other types of ledger-based technology. So I would want to define retail payments, B2B payments, and then government payments. So if we're looking at retail, I don't see how it competes with the current infrastructure. If we're looking at, for interest, in the shipping area where you have a complexity of transactions, it makes an awful lot of sense. If we look at a high-value government transaction between, I just said Mexico to Philippines is a very expensive, long transaction. The settlement time is very long. The application of this technology to settle a high-value transaction securely within a day, there is potential there. So I wanted to frame it up that I hate getting on stage and talking about blockchain for payments, because it doesn't work for retail payments. Because we've tried it. You know, we invested a few $1 million and it just simply doesn't work. Now, when Lightning comes out and whatnot, there's maybe an option. But I do think you've got to frame it around, if we're going to talk about this new technology where it may have impact, we have to be very careful where we're talking.
So, and on that note, you know, what projects, you know, are you gentlemen working on right now where, you know, you truly applied blockchain technology? Because everybody talks about it, but I think there is still, you know, educational barrier, as well as, you know, some people still associate blockchain with, you know, crypto. And frankly, you know, there are not so many solutions out there that, you know, got proved. So can you give us some examples? What are you working on and what you are seeing as the next step?
Well, probably I'm going to start. So I think there are a lot of applications where it also makes sense. For example, real estate, you know, one of the, you know, probably example that you're familiar with is property, where like last year, for example, you were able to buy an apartment, let's say in Kiev, Ukraine, like being a US citizen, right? So if you would not have this, you know, decentralized solution where you have, you eliminate the bureaucracy, you eliminate the fraud, you eliminate the potential so that you will never get even the documents for the apartment you're buying. So it makes sense in some applications. You know, I do believe that there are a lot of projects here. You have 8base, you have Oath, you know, like all they solve a particular problem in a certain industry, right? So, but I do agree that if we're talking general payments, right now there's a lot of miscommunication, and if you ever have to ask a project, why do they use blockchain? That's already a failure. That I would frame it to start.
Yeah, I would agree that blockchain should be obvious in its use case in a business setting. And as far as using payments, I think I'll echo what John said. Large transactions right now are where it makes most sense. Funding accounts is a good way. If you want instant settlements, that way the funds are available for tradability. That's something that we're going to in that regard. Somebody wants to trade $100,000, $1 million. It's a lot faster for them to deposit XRP, BTC, Ether versus a wire. A wire is going to take a lot of calls, a lot of time, and it's a lot faster. Just faster for big payments, and it makes sense.
To piggyback on what Edwin said, we do a lot of business holding assets for tokenized assets. So we hold a lot of USD, euros, gold for people who are tokenizing that. And a lot of the use case that we see, going back to John's point, is a lot of international large payments and a lot of payments that try to move very quickly and at scale. So if you need to move 100 million US dollars on a Saturday, how are you going to do that? you're going to use some sort of a tokenized version of the US dollar on the blockchain, because the FedWire system is closed on weekends, for example.
In our case, we use our token, ship token, which is linked to smart contracts for shipping. So it's an escrow-like payment structure where every stage of the execution of a smart contract within our transportation network and further in the ecosystem that we develop will be linked to a transaction with the help of banks or other financial institutions that provide this sort of credit or finance for a particular deal. It could be a buyer that uses this payment structure to pay as the product moves from door to door, from point A to B. So it has a very good potential, and it's literally, as we speak, we integrate. We start integrating banks into our centralized marketplace already.
Okay, interesting. And we also talked, so I think we all agree that, you know, Visas and MasterCards are not going anywhere, right? Although we do know that those large institutions are very curious in exploring blockchain and, you know, filing patents like crazy. But we also talked about the unbanked population, right? So if we can talk about that for a second, so do you see a true use case for the unbanked when, you know, they don't have the infrastructure that we're used to? Can you show some examples?
So we've looked at this for 4 years now, and banking the unbanked is not a payments problem. It's an identity problem. And so solving the identity problem is the first part of solving the unbanked. Why can't I get a bank account? Well, we don't know who you are, but as long as you have a utility bill, well, I haven't got a house. Well, if you have a telephone bill, well, I can't afford, I haven't got credit. All of the system is entirely designed to keep people out who cost banks money. So you have to be able to work out, I'll ask the panel, what percentage of a bank's revenues in the US are overdraft charges? Have a guess.
Overwhelming percentage. It's a lot more than people would anticipate.
35%. Top line revenues, overdraft fees. So I run this big bank infrastructure and I persuade people to have a current account, and then I do this thing where when their account's being credited, I delay it a day so they can be debited and overdrawn, and I'm going to rip them off for fees. That's the entire model of retail banking. So the key is, can we solve the identity piece first? And then once we have an identity piece, can we get a lower cost, redundant infrastructure to manage an account? So that question on low cost, redundant infrastructure, so we built a platform in the UK in 2015, we're really excited, and we tethered a pound with Ethereum. It was useless. Because people went to use it, I put my transaction in and the merchant's like, it's okay, I just wait for it to clear. 30 minutes later, buying your milk, because you want to get something for your breakfast, right? People just wouldn't use it. You have to meet that expectation that I go in, I buy my milk, I do something with my phone and my card, and then I wait a little bit, and then I'm done. So that failed. Now, we're trying a new plan, because you have to get lower costs than Visa, MasterCard, and they've invested close to $1 trillion in that network over the last 20 years. Can you get a low-cost account management infrastructure? The teaser I'll give, whilst I'm being so negative, because there's a super narrow use case for humans, there is a gigantic use case for machines. In 5 years to 10 years time, we're going to have 50 devices in our household that pay for stuff on our behalf. They aren't going to have a credit card. They're going to have to make payment decisions on our behalf.
So to your point, one of the key issues is the digital identity, right? So even if the device is going to be making decisions on my behalf, it's ultimately linked to, you know, a human being. So how do you solve for that?
Well, it's linked to, I'll pass the conversation on, but it's linked to an account. It's not linked to a human. Like, our cards aren't linked to us. They have a sort code and an account number, or they have a number on it that links to an account. So our entire payments infrastructure is definitively not linked to a person. It's linked to a mode of payment, like a card or now a phone. It's not linked to a person, so we have to design that infrastructure at a lower cost with better identity.
I've had conversations with people familiar with the government and the way that works. I approached them in digitizing identity, something similar to what Estonia did. And I was a little optimistic of how far behind the American government is on being able to implement such a process. We're looking at doing that in terms of the country, but we're still 15 years away from getting, I mean, we're still running, as I was saying, we're still running mainframes for the IRS to process tax returns, OS 390. I mean, you have to dust these things off in 1965 to get them up for tax returns.
It's like the Digital Republic of Estonia, right? Where they sold for so many things in the healthcare industry, right?
And that was just to solve our know your client use case, because of easing onboarding of clients. Everybody's known to the government. We should have a digital identity. I can say, verify that against the IRS and Social Security Administration. But like I said, it's digitization of KYC, very far off.
I would add to that, I think digital citizenship in Estonia is a good example, and we see like republics like like Bermuda, Suriname. There are a lot of new like smaller countries that are like the emerging markets that are looking into it. And I would back up a little bit and also attack like the trust issue. I think while we're talking about in the context of the blockchain, there is an underlying, I would say, mistrust in the current financial institutions. And I think there's not a lot of people who understand how they work now and how do we have the rip-off of, you were talking about the overdrafts or even like if we send, I don't think that it makes sense right now. If I send a wire transfer, for me to pay $50 to $60 for a wire transfer, $2,000 to Hong Kong. It doesn't make sense right now. So, but it exists, right? So there are a lot of, I mean, we're not there yet, but I do believe that there are another levels, another layers. So the next steps is tokenization of the national currencies. We've seen interesting examples of Aurora coin in Iceland. And it actually, if we look at it, like, to cut the story short, it failed. But exactly, we see petrodollars, for example, in Venezuela, right? And it's artificial in a country where the hyperinflation is, what, 91% or something around? And it's artificially created. It's not a solution. It's not a feasible solution. However, in the future, we might see emerging markets that will experiment with different models, right? Revenue share models or models that will make sense. And to your point, Kevin, like coming back to the security token offerings, where this may be a new level of access, new access to liquidity, and new access to global markets. So we're talking about the new interconnected world where the global markets, they reunite and you have access. I think the question of trust and access is a lot of very common topics that we need to talk about a little bit.
Interesting. And to this point, even before we started our discussion, it still amazes that some people, talk about blockchain, but didn't even read the Satoshi, white paper, like the whole concept, how it came about, right, and what problem he was trying to solve for. And from my personal experience, we see so many different ventures and projects that start with the technology piece without realizing what are we truly solving for, right? What pain points, what issues, and by the way, it's just a technology, so with new technology are going to come new risks and new challenges, and you always have to do pros and cons. So back to Constantin's point, if you're talking about microtransactions, right, it's one set of issues. If we're talking about cross-border transactions, can be a completely different set of issues. And I also think we talked about stable coins prior to the panel. So would you like to share some thoughts about that phenomenon that's going on in the industry?
Sure. I think to link kind of the STOs and the milk, which is a very odd combination. A lot of the payment space and a lot of the innovation and technology really depends on what you're paying for. So if I'm paying for milk, that can't be a 30-minute transaction. That has to be a very quick, a few seconds to authorize type of a transaction. If I'm purchasing securities in some STO, I don't care if it takes an hour for my funds to arrive. What really matters in that payment application is the amount of funds that become available to the company raising money. Right? Presumably no company through an STO is raising money because they already have tons of money and they're very bored and don't know what else to do. Right? Presumably they have a use for these proceeds. And if I'm the company in this context, what I'm looking for is payments that aren't reversible. Right? So if there's an ACH transaction that comes in, if it wasn't done according to Nacho rules, there's a 60-day clawback. Right? Visa and MasterCard have even longer clawbacks. So if you're kind of the company that's receiving these funds, and I need these funds to make payroll, what happens if I use them and a month later they get pulled from me? Or you really want payments that once they're settled for real. And that, I think, is where a lot of the blockchain space becomes very interesting. And I almost used the word cryptocurrency, and I was going to hate myself for doing that. So I think a lot of how we store value in Bitcoin and Ethereum and those things is completely garbage for payments. You can't...
It's store value, right?
Correct. You can't deal with that volatility in the payment space. If I'm a merchant, I can't sell you a t-shirt for $20 that, oh, maybe it's $15 by the time I get the money. That doesn't make any sense. And that's where, as a stopgap, and I'm not saying this is the ideal solution, as a stopgap, we're seeing a lot of stablecoins. We're seeing people coming in with True USD or Stronghold USD. That way you're able to leverage the instant settlements and the irrevocability of the payments without having to deal with the massive volatility. And I have a very good attorney friend who works for one of these STO platforms, and they do payroll in Ethereum. She wakes up in the morning and 5% of her paycheck's gone. Or she has 10% more of her paycheck. Right? If you have to plan cash flows, that just doesn't work.
I mean, I think we all agree that, you know, crypto is not for everyone and it's volatile for a reason. I mean, I look at crypto as a digital asset class, right? Similar how you can have other assets. Let's not steal the thunder from my business partner Rita, who is going to talk about security token offerings, you know, later on, because I know it's a very interesting topic. But going back to blockchain application, what about security issues, right? We talked about a digital identity issue a little bit. Do you have any hands-on experience in that space? Because I think Stephen actually brought up some pain points related to cybersecurity.
So there's a really big problem with the entirety of blockchain because we have this immutable ledger thing, which is brilliant. The data that gets written onto the ledger, how do you know it was the data that was meant to be on the ledger? It's a really simple question. If you go ask IBM, they haven't got an answer. Just literally go over and say, look, I'm a big enterprise and I want to do supply chain integrity and I've got all these shipping containers and I need that data so I can make financial decisions. But how can you guarantee me that the data in my ledger on my fancy screen is actually of that shipping container? And their answer is, we don't know. So here's a good example. US government wanted to know the water well levels in California. And they had all this data and they were making financial investment decisions to the tune of billions, and it transpired that the data had been interfered with by our government. No guesses about the 2 or 3 governments it was. So they made billion-dollar purchasing decisions based off manipulated data by a foreign government. So if somebody doesn't solve the is it the right data in your immutable ledger, all of this is worthless.
Right, and nobody questions the transaction, right? So
the origin of the data.
The origin of the data and who is on the side of the transaction as well. So
it's immutable. It's amazing. Okay,
yeah, but what exactly are you recording, right? So that's the key
immutable
question.
is only as good as the quality of data that's going into it. If it's immutable and it's right, that's perfect. If it's immutable and it's wrong, you're screwed.
Hence the point again, you know, data technology, just a new technology, but as they used to say, garbage in, garbage out, right? Yes. So it's the issue of, you know, data quality and the origin of data in a completely different movement in the industry. Who owns the data? But I don't want to switch to the discussion.
And there are companies in the shipping example that are trying to solve that with RFID and scanning, but then you're assuming somebody placed the right RFID chip on the package so that way it gets scanned appropriately. So as soon as you solve one problem, there's another question that then has to be solved. So people are looking into it, but yes.
But I'll pass it on to the shipping, just to tee up the shipping example. One thing that I think would stripe out on payments is complexity of transactions. So me buying milk isn't complex, there's no conditions to it. If it's, I'm going to pay you if my boxes have all arrived air conditioned to this temperature, to this humidity, if you add a level of complexity to a payment, then that is a very, very good use case for conditional payments technology, which is basically what you can use this stuff for.
Well, so far we have the only international shipping related workable project, and it's patented, so I can share with you the way it's structured. Actually, we've done our smart contract on Ethereum, on EOS, and finally on Hyperledger Fabric. And at the end we stopped on Hyperledger Fabric as a technology, because they have a very good solution in terms of tangible and non-tangible assets, which we found very well fitting into our project. So the way we schedule, the way we structured it is a network. Everybody is linked to their own asset. It be the ship, a terminal, cargo, and you have to remember that a tracker or a sensor is only a little part of the process. Payments and international logistics are about documentation. You have to have a bill of lading, you have to have or a airway bill, or a package of certificate of origin, end user certificate, and so on and so on. So all this package of documents has to be collected correctly. So in our smart contract, we have an electronic bill of lading, which is created by a combination of different players. It's like a community of players that you invite into creating your smart contract. And a sensor or a satellite data is just one of these numerous community participants. And when that document is created, and if one sensor fails, you can always go back and check what's wrong with that sensor, or why is the satellite saying the ship has not sailed from this port and all the others do. And so you verify this till the last moment, until all the documents are made correctly. You use this, also the distributed ledger of this information to verify it, and then the documents pass on to the bank or whatever other financial institution that finances this, and then they use the token or any other means to make that payment.
This is interesting, and it sounds like the same concept can be applied to other industries as well, right?
Yes, because in fact our third phase is implications of cargo flows and supply chains. And if you look at it from the end user point of view or an industrial point of view, you have, for example, an EPC contractor. If anybody knows who that is, for them, it's not about when the cargo is ready to be shipped. It's about the sequence of delivery. So they have hundreds of sources, and they have to deliver it on time. So they have one use case. An agricultural sector, they may have a different approach, and different contracts, CNF or FOB or X-Works and so on. So all these payments are related to a smart contract. This is why commodity exchanges are also now linking to our shipping-related marketplace.
So it's a combination of supply chain, and I love how you positioned it, like conditional payments, right? Not just like an easy, transaction in a retail store, but when there is a chain of conditional events that happen.
In fact, if you know Komgo, K-O-M-G-O, this is a banking platform which has just been announced. And they also turned to us saying, well, let's cooperate, because we've done this, startup of banks, and we would like other use cases of this technology, or payment technology, or blockchain technology to be interconnected. So this is about interconnectivity.
Interesting.
Well, I can relate to the shipping industry, because I've been exporting at a time 50,000 vessels from Ukraine to Middle East and Western Europe, and I can tell you that there is use case. There are a lot of players, surveyors, there are people who audit the documents, and I think that one of the biggest problems here is also bureaucracy and corruption. So, and unfortunately, we're not still there where we can trust the global auditor that will be able to, again, coming back to the origin of the documents we're uploading, right? So if we, let's say, apply Incoterms or GAFTA or any other certificates of origin, quality certificates, and they're let's say SGS, they can certify that this is the one, then you can in some countries you can actually bribe SGS to certify documents so that it goes to the problem of the initiative. But it's a long story. What I'm saying, that it's great that we're developing it, but it will probably, in my humble opinion, it will take time until we, again, globalize it and it will be adapted for all the countries.
Yeah, but you have to remember, the competition is not about individual countries. The competition is about building an ecosystem. So if Europe, for example, or the US, or Europe and US will connect in a certain ecosystem, it will work. It doesn't mean that all the countries in the world have to start using it. It's about creating an efficient ecosystem.
No, sure, I agree.
And I think human factor is not going anywhere, right? So you have to create an ecosystem that will incentivize the behavior, right? I mean, at different levels, on a project level, on a country level, on an industry level, whatever use case you're trying to solve for. And I think we're running out of time, unless you have any final remarks.
Yeah, until the machines come back in and AI is loading the ship, your machines are loading the ship, maybe we reduce that human level even further.
I just want to share an exciting example of a friend. It's not a project that we invested in, it's just an exciting example of, Syria that has a lot of refugees. We're talking about a country that, like millions of people died, and now there's a lot of, it's not about unbanked, it's people who do not have access to simple needs like food and, like water. And he created a project where Israeli side, will be able to provide, like, within the, the payment guide, they created a ledger with a cryptocurrency, and they can pay the local vendors, like people who produce bread, people who just, can give them water in exchange of their currency, and then they sell it on shekels, because it would not be possible to connect otherwise Syria and Israel in any other ways. So I think it's exciting, and it works on certain interesting local levels as well.
I think as a closing thought, the payment space is incredibly broad, as I think we've illustrated. And some parts of the payment space can benefit from the application of blockchain technologies, and for others, it's completely useless. I think the companies in the space that will do well are the ones that use blockchain type technologies to actually add value to the space, and not those that are using blockchain for the sake of using blockchain.
Since we are past time, I can only invite everybody to go to shipnext.io if you're interested for more information. You're welcome to.
Are there any questions? Yes.
John, is there a mechanism in place so if you find out that the veracity of the data has been tampered, is there some mechanism in place to correct it?
In a decentralized world, no. Just think about bad transaction data in Ethereum. We had a hard fork in Ethereum a long time ago because we had bad transaction data through the DAO, and there was no way to roll it back. So the first thing is the data the right data? And that doesn't exist. And therefore, the next part is if we were to fix that, and then we found out the data was garbage, how do you roll it back? They're two fundamental challenges that practically no one is addressing because they're complicated, enterprise, and don't sound good on stage.
So the key issue is about data integrity and quality.
Yeah, I mean, what we can do is we can tokenize real estate on the moon, and you can buy it now. It's just $10 in crypto. But the real problem is this heavy-duty infrastructure, which is what this technology is, and it's heavy-duty engineering, and that's dull as dishwater. But none of this works. Nobody's doing billions of dollars. The FX market's $3 trillion a day. Like, tokenizing one flat in Estonia is irrelevant. If this is going to be used at scale, there are fundamental problems that have to be solved. And if you're an investor and you find one of those companies and you back it and they solve one of these niche problems, that's where the massive returns are, not in the other Mickey Mouse stuff.
And towards the Forex market, I think tokenization of fixed income bond trading settlements and issuance is, and back to the security token offering, is a real use case for transmitting value and recording ownership on the blockchain. So I think that's where we'll see more adoption take place. Governments starting to do bond issuance on the chain, and IMF money transmissions when you get into those large sums.
And we're out of time. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, our lovely speakers. Appreciate it.
Thank you very much.